This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 101 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by the host of Get Up and one of the most recognizable faces at ESPN. He is Mike Greenberg. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I want to note that we're recording this Tuesday afternoon ahead of Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals. The podcast is not going to be released until Friday, so who knows where this series is going to be at that point. But you are a New Yorker. I assume you grew up a Knicks fan. Is that correct?
I did. I grew up. My parents had tickets to the Knicks when I was a kid. In fact, we were the other day on Get Up. It came up that the Knicks fans have been long suffering, and I was making the point that someone like Peter Schrager, who was throwing out the '90s. I mean, the '90s were the glory days of the Knicks. I grew up rooting for Lonnie Shelton and Larry Demick and Glenn Gondrezick and Toby Knight and all these other guys, Ray Williams, Michael Ray Richardson, all the Knicks of the late '70s who came right after the glory days. I'm just not quite old enough to remember the championship Knicks. Like, I remember Frazier and Reed at the very end of their careers. Walt Frazier was my favorite player ever. I slept in New York Knicks number 10 footy pajamas. So I loved those guys, but I didn't see them at their best. I saw them when they were really at the end. So I've watched a lot of really terrible New York Knicks basketball, and the teams of the '90s, the Pat Riley, Patrick Ewing teams were by far the best that it has been. So those guys have no idea what true suffering means as a Knicks fan. So this is this dawning of this new era is something that I've been looking forward to for a very long time.
So are you still a diehard Knicks fan? Because your Jets fandom is obviously well documented, but were you a bigger Jets fan than Knicks fan?
I was a bigger Knicks. It was probably equal when I was a kid. But here's what happened. My first broadcasting work was in Chicago locally. I went to college outside of Chicago in Northwestern. And I got a job working in local radio in Chicago. And through a series of very fortuitous breaks, I wound up at the age of 24 being the Bulls beat reporter for the radio station I worked for. And I covered them and traveled with them for years. And during those series in 92, 93, and 94, the Bulls and Knicks played what I think might have, in my lifetime of covering sports, they were the best series of competitions I've ever seen. I've never experienced anything like being at those series with Riley and Ewing on one side and Michael and Phil on the other. And it was epic. And 92 and 93, the Bulls won both of those years. 93 was the Charles Smith game and all of that. And then 94, when Michael was playing baseball, it was the Hugh Hollins game, and the Knicks won that series on their way to the finals. During that time, being around the Bulls, being with them every single day, I'm not suggesting that I stopped rooting for the Knicks, but I wasn't in it. I was so connected to the Bulls that it was almost impossible not to sort of get sucked up into what they were doing. And then the Knicks almost immediately went into a free fall that lasted multiple decades, to the point that my son, who is 22 years old and grew up in the New York area, and the only sport he ever played and loved was basketball, never rooted for the Knicks. There was nothing to root for. He is one of that generation that roots for individual players. So he roots for Steph Curry and guys like that. So a lot of the Knick stuff became somewhat dormant. I would say it was dormant inside me. So today I'm not nearly as passionate about it as I am the Jets, but I remain a fan, and I would love to see good things happen for them. And I hope that as people are listening to this conversation, Friday, I hope that as people are listening to this conversation, the Knicks will be ahead in the series 3-2. But if I were to bet on it right now in advance, that's not what I expect.
Yeah. How did you land that job with the Score? I would imagine at 23, 24, covering the Bulls that time in the early 90s was a pretty sought after gig.
Well, see, that was the thing. It wasn't a gig. It was incredibly fortunate. Here's what happened. So I got a job working behind the scenes. I was a producer. When the Score first started in Chicago, WSCR, the first all sports radio station in Chicago, started in January of 92. They hired me among many other people, and I was a producer. I was not on the air. And I talked the the program director, Ron Gleason, whom I had worked for as a PA at our previous station at WMAQ Radio in Chicago, which does not exist anymore. I talked him into letting me go out and cover games at night after my shift. I would produce the afternoon show, and then I would go out to the old Chicago Stadium, and I would cover the Bulls game that night, the Blackhawks game that night. Sometimes I'd go over to the park and cover a White Sox game or a Cubs game, and I would just get post-game sound afterwards and file a report that would air on the morning show. And I did well enough at that a few people took notice of it. But here's where I got really lucky. They had not, when they started the station, they didn't hire anyone to cover the teams. And the Bulls, of course, at that time were the most popular team ever. And Michael Jordan may very well have been the most famous person in the world. And I was aware, because of my New York roots, I was aware of WFAN and Susan Waldman. And for anyone listening to this conversation who doesn't know, Susan Waldman was an electronic beat reporter. She covered the Yankees every day for WFAN in the same way that a beat reporter might cover the Yankees for the New York Post or the Daily News or the New York Times or whatever it is. And so I went into the boss, Ron Gleason, and I said, I'd like to propose that we have someone cover the Bulls every day the way Susan Waldman does in New York. There's enough interest in this team, and I would like to volunteer for that job. And to my never-ending astonishment and with my never-ending gratitude, he thought it was a good idea. And so they sent me on the road with the Bulls starting in the 92 playoffs. And so I was with the Bulls for their entire run in the playoffs in 92, the entire season and their run in 93. I went with Jordan when he played spring training baseball for a couple of months, and then picked up the Bulls after that in 94, was with them all the way to the end of a season I'll never forget. Scottie Pippen should have been the MVP of the league. And then Jordan came back. And so that was the job. And then ultimately I got a TV job in town, and that was that. But that was how I got that job. It was a job that did not previously exist. And if they had hired someone to do that when they launched the station, I have no idea where I would be now.
How was covering Jordan? How was he with the local media?
Incredible. It was a totally different time. But Michael was, I would say, beyond cooperative. He was friendly. He was fun. He was into it. He liked it. He liked talking about basketball. He liked the attention. Almost none of it was negative. It was such a different world, Brandon. Like all of the nonsense that exists in this day and age on social media and everything else, that just wasn't the world we lived in. Michael Jordan was beloved. What tiny little bit of criticism may have existed of him was completely drowned out by the adulation that he received. The relationships between the athletes and the people who cover them were so different then than they are now. And that's a perfect example of that. And I've often said, if Michael Jordan had come along 20 years later, if he had to live with, let's just use LeBron James, who we might say is sort of his heir apparent or whatever, however you want to frame that. And LeBron to me is the first immortal of the social media era. Michael would not have handled it well. I think that's a statement of fact. Michael would not have dealt with the nonsense well. That it would have eaten him alive, because he focused, and this is legendary. Anyone who watched Last Dance and all that stuff has seen it. He could focus on just any one little tiny thing that he could turn into a slight, and it would drive him insane. It would drive him to scoring 50 points on a Tuesday night in February in New Jersey. I don't know how he would have handled this environment that we live in today. So it was so different then. So he was incredibly accommodating and fun and generally easy to deal with, particularly around those of us who were there every day that he knew and had some relationship with. It was terrific. But for me, more importantly than that, just being up close to seeing that everything I think I know about greatness, everything I will always compare everything to that, to him, to what he was, to his mentality, to his unimaginable mental toughness, psychological strength. He was unbelievable. And so the experience of being around him, well beyond the enjoyable aspect of being able to cover it. I learned more from that. That was like going to graduate school. Like I went to college, and then Michael Jordan was my master's degree. That's where I learned what sports is supposed to look like.
What did you want to do out of college? Was it, did you want to be a beat reporter? Did you want to do play-by-play, sports host? What was your goal at that time?
Well, so at that time, everyone's aspiration was to be a Sports Center anchor. Sports Center was, and I think remains, the Rolls Royce of sports news and information broadcast. But there really was sports radio when I was in college. So WFAN, I think, started in 1989, I think, or
87.
87.
I think 87. I think Mike and the Mad Dog started in 89.
Okay, so that's so I grew up in New York. I left for college in the fall of 85. So there was no sports talk on the radio.
Yeah.
So I thought I wanted to be a writer. I thought I wanted to write for the New York Post or the Daily News or something like that. And then when I got to college and I started to do a little bit of TV, I thought that that's what I would want to do, that I would want to do the sports at 5, 6, and 11, on the local evening news, and maybe eventually work my way up to Sports Center, because there really was no other aspiration. By the time I graduated from college, there was sports talk radio out there, and I was very interested in getting involved in that. And so I did. And one thing led to another, and I was at the Score, et cetera, et cetera. I wound up at ESPN. And then the next, ultimately I wound up with Mike doing the radio show in the mornings. But that wasn't stuff that you could really aspire to when I was growing up, because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And shows like Get Up and PTI and First Take and things like that didn't exist, and I would never have imagined they would. So what I really wanted to be at that time was a Sports Center anchor. And when I got hired at ESPN, that's what I hoped I would get a chance to do.
Did you have a favorite or most memorable interaction with Jordan?
Well, there are a bunch of stories that I like to tell. Here's the one that jumps immediately to mind. So during the 93 playoffs, there was a huge storyline going on that the Knicks were complaining that Jordan got all of the calls, that he got all of the beneficial treatment from officials, which parenthetically, my Knicks fan father went to his grave believing 100% true. I can still hear him yelling in my ear about Jordan pushing off. Anyway, in those days, I don't know if they do it this way anymore. During a playoff series, the two teams would have their game day shoot-arounds in the arena, or their off-day practices, in the arena where the game was being played, so that the media could come. So, for example, this was in the story I'm about to tell you, it took place in Madison Square Garden, and it was a day off between games of that series. And the Knicks came first in the morning, and they did their shoot-around, and they had their media availability, and then they left, and the Bulls came. So during the Knicks media availability, all the entire storyline, clearly this was Pat Riley wanting this to be what everyone was talking about, was Michael gets all the calls, Michael gets all the calls. He wanted the pressure on the officiating to be, to scrutinize all the favorable whistle they thought Michael got. So now the Bulls arrive. So we all go racing over, and I want to be the one to ask the question, because I just know it's going to get a great response. And I know that, this cut's going to be everywhere. Sports Center is going to run it. Maybe my voice will be on there, all of that. And so we all get there, and I said, Michael, the Knicks are over there saying you get all the calls. And there's like a hush. And he looks right at me, and there's a pause. And then he says, so? And that was it. And it was unusable, obviously, so I didn't get what I wanted out of it. But it was a wonderful sort of illustration of his mentality. It was like, I don't give a damn what they're saying. I don't give a damn if I'm getting all the calls. Good. I hope I keep getting them. I'm here to win, and I'm not here for any of this nonsense. And I love that story. I remember that. I remember the look on his face like it was yesterday. The other story I tell, if you have a minute, because it's a little longer, but I really love this story, is in the spring of 1994, Michael Jordan went to play baseball, and he was in Sarasota, Florida, which is where the White Sox had their spring training then. They've subsequently moved to Arizona, but they trained at Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota, and my radio station sent me down there. Parenthetically, I keep digressing. We didn't have the budget to put me in a hotel. The only hotel in Sarasota at that time, I think, was the Ritz-Carlton, where Dick Vitale now has his huge gala every year. And my radio station didn't have anywhere near the budget to put me in a Ritz-Carlton. I was there for like 7 weeks. And so we rented me a room in a house. I swear on my life this story is true. On Siesta Key, there were 6 bedrooms in this house. I had 1 bedroom. The occupants of the other 5 bedrooms were all women, median age 87. That's who I was living in this house with. And there's just a phone. Like, this was back in the days, there were no cell phones. There was a phone line. And I would be on the air doing my reports, and one of the women would pick up the phone and start dialing. It happened all the time. So there was a payphone across the street that I would go on. That's where I did all of my reports back to Chicago from, was the payphone across the street. So anyway, and Michael, by the way, thought that was hilarious. He thought the fact that I was living with all of these very, very elderly women was hilarious, but that's neither here nor there. So, but what you might not know is that when Jordan first started playing baseball, there were a lot of people who thought it was a disgrace. This was where he really did get criticized. Sports Illustrated had a cover that said Michael Jordan and the White Sox are an embarrassment to baseball. And there was a lot of criticism. And he started out terribly. I want to say he was 0 for his first like 15 or 16 or something like that, hitless. And I'm, in a rented car driving up and down the west coast of Florida covering his games. And one night in a tiny little ballpark, it had rained that day, and I think no one thought the game was going to get played. So there were 3 reporters in the press box. It was the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, and me. And Jordan plays in this game, and he gets fooled on a pitch, and he swings out of his shoes, and he hits a little dribbler up the third base line, and he beats it out for a single. So he's finally gotten a hit. So the game ends. The 3 of us go down to the locker room, and he is in there in the clubhouse, and they are pouring beer on him. That baseball celebration, they're all dumping beer on him. And he's standing there, cigar in his hand, unlit, stripped to the waist, baseball pants, no shirt on, bat over his shoulder. And we ask him a couple of questions, and then we leave. We're walking out the door to go do our stories. And for some reason, I turned back and looked at him again before I left. And I'll never forget it. He was sitting on this bench in this tiny little clubhouse, smaller than the locker room at my high school, and covered in cheap beer with a cigar and the baseball bat. And he had a smile on his face, like a look of satisfaction that was the equal of what I had seen. This is a man I had seen win gold medals. I had seen win, at that time, 3 NBA championships, a national championship in basketball. But he was as satisfied and happy in that moment as I saw him at any other time. And I think there's such a great lesson in that somewhere that I've tried to remember. And I tell this story anytime I speak at like a function or graduation or whatever it is, that in life, like most days, you don't wind up hitting a screaming line drive off the left center field wall. But every single day, there's going to be a little dribbler up the third base line that you beat out for a single. And if you will just look for those and celebrate them, your life will be better. And I love that story. And it's, if you ask me sort of the image of Michael that is singed into my memory above all the championships and everything else, it was that night, wherever the hell we were in some little town in Florida.
Why did you think Jordan retired the first time?
I know that, look, a lot of different things happen. I have not, never have, do not in any way believe that it was orchestrated by the league because of gambling or any of that. If that's the first part, if that's what you're asking me, I've never believed that. There's no way in the world that could have been kept a secret. I think 2 things happened. So they win the title in 91. They win the title again in 92. Then in 92 came the Dream Team summer in Barcelona. Michael did not want to be a part of it. If anyone who's old enough to remember that will recall, Michael did not want to go. He was burned out. He was exhausted from winning the back-to-back championships. But between the NBA, which was sending, our guy, the players for the first time, and Nike, there was so much pressure on Go that he goes. So that's his summer. He spends it in Barcelona. And as stress-free as winning the gold medal was for that group, it was still, that was like, they were the Beatles. it was not a relaxing summer. Then they come back and they win it again in 93. And that was the most grueling season. They went in 93. They beat the Knicks in 6 unbelievably tough games. They beat Phoenix in 6 unbelievably tough games. Jordan was brilliant. He was exhausted. He was completely exhausted. And then sometime, I forget exactly what the date was now, but something in the neighborhood of a month after the season, the championship ends, his father is senselessly murdered while sleeping in his car on the side of a road. And I think this has always been my opinion, and I'm not stating this as fact because he has never told me this. And my relationship with him, while I think it is a good one, is not one that I would ever have this conversation with him. Maybe he would with some other people that he knows way better. But I think he just couldn't fathom the idea of going right back into it. I think he needed to process what happened to his father. He needed to grieve. He needed a break. I think he just was genuinely burned out. And that's why he retired in whatever it was, September, I guess it was, of 93, August or September, whenever he announced that. And I always suspected at that time that he might come back because I thought it just made sense. Like, I'm a big believer in Occam's razor. Like, people always try and assign, in some cases, outlandish explanations for things that do not require them. What I've just described to you feels like the most reasonable explanation of what happened. And it seemed to me that way at the time as well. And he was only 31 years old. So it felt to me like when he has a little time to deal with this, he'll probably come back. Now, I didn't see him going and playing baseball. And that took a really weird turn. So when he went to do that, I think at that time I thought he was just going to pursue that. But I wasn't, that's my way of saying, I guess I wasn't all that surprised that he decided to come back and play in the NBA again. And thank God he did. And they won 3 more titles. And if you look back on it, and I continue to say this because I think it is important, in the years that ended in 96, 97, and 98, when Jordan, I think, was 33, 34, and 35 years old, he played 82, 82, and 82 regular season games and won the championship every year. And that was when he went from being a meteor to being the greatest of all time. And so that to me that's a very long answer to what was a pretty direct and short question. I think that's the reason that he walked away from it when he did. The second time, I think the second time he just had enough. I think the Bulls were such a dysfunctional mess, as was really well highlighted and documented in Last Dance. And I was surprised he came back from that one.
What do you think of Jordan signing with NBC, being part of their NBA coverage?
I mean, it's a coup, right? It's the greatest. What person would you rather have? I have no idea what role he's going to have. I see him occasionally now. I spend some time in Florida playing golf, and that's where you can find Michael most of the time. And I think he really enjoys that life. The sense I get, and again, I'm not comfortable speaking for like we're best friends, because sometimes, I fear that people will think I'm trying to give that impression, and we're not. I barely know him. I mean, I know him well enough to say hello and exchange pleasant greetings and all of that. But he seems, and from the people I know who know him much better, he seems really happy. He seems to have found a really nice groove in his life and his marriage with his daughters and everything else. He seems to be sort of at peace psychologically in a way that I'm not sure that he was before. So I would be surprised if what he wants to do is go back into working a lot, the way Charles Barkley does, the way Tom Brady does. That would surprise me. It would pleasantly surprise me. I'd love to see him on TV giving candid opinions. If I had to predict it, I would predict that he will be on more sort of occasionally, and then maybe when the playoffs come or something like that, it'll ramp up. I'm just guessing about that. But generally speaking, I mean, I'm thrilled. I can't wait to watch him. I think he'll be fantastic.
What do you think of Inside the NBA going to ESPN next season?
I think it's great. I hope that they're excited about it. I think it's wonderful. Look, that show is iconic, right? They're great. All of them are great. And if the alternative was that show ceases to exist, like it ceases to be a part of the conversation around basketball, or they could come join my network, which has been my home for almost 29 years. That's a really easy choice for me. I'm thrilled for it. I love those guys, and I'm looking forward to watching, and I hope that they will love it. I know they're a little trepidatious. I've read all the same stuff, probably on your website and other places, that they're a little trepidatious about making the change. And I understand that when you're used to something for a really long time, any kind of change is going to come with some wariness. But I see no reason why it won't be a home run. They're great. They'll just come over to ESPN, do the same show, and be equally great. So I think it's terrific, and I think it should be a huge success.
If you were still hosting NBA Countdown, do you think you would be bothered by the addition of Inside the NBA?
Look, there are certain things that you just have to accept. If you have the opportunity to go out and get those guys, you do it. If I'm trying to think of an analogy, I'll give you an example. Like if I'm trying to think of someone who's like, if Bob Costas in his prime had called up ESPN and said, "Hey, I like what you guys are doing in the morning. I'd like to replace Greenberg on that Get Up show." While I wouldn't be happy about it, obviously, it would be very hard for me to say, "No, this is a terrible idea you guys have. He's the greatest broadcaster in history. I'm doing well. Of course you're going to do it." And so, look, Malika is phenomenal. I think what they're doing with the show now is terrific. I was pleased with what I did when I was there. I really liked it. And I think the show is good, and it will continue to go on. There will be plenty of nights where they'll still be on. And Malika is going to be, already is, and will continue to be a superstar in the business. I'm thrilled that she's getting involved now in the WNBA, and she will be able to handpick whatever it is she wants to do for the next 30 years. I think everyone understands that if you can get Charles and Kenny and Shaq and Ernie, you do it. So I would imagine most people feel that way.
Charles is always talking about how he has no interest in doing any other shows at ESPN. Will you attempt to get him on Get Up during the NBA season?
Sure. And he already does come on. He comes on occasionally. Like I don't abuse it. I sent him a text the morning after. So the Luka trade broke on a Saturday night, right? Shams stopped the world dead in its tracks. And I texted Charles on Sunday and I said, "Hey, how about giving me a half hour tomorrow?" And he did. So he's been great about that. Look, Charles, it has been my experience with him. He loves talking about sports. He does a ton of shows.
Yes.
I think what he doesn't want is for it to be like, okay, this is your schedule. You're going to do this show and then this show and then this show. This is what you're going to do. I think that's what he doesn't want. Again, I'm not speaking for him, but do I think that he will continue to be open to occasionally when there's really big stories out there to come on Get Up, to come on First Take, to come on PTI? Of course, because I think he enjoys doing that. I think he likes being part of the conversation, and I consider him, myself, to be his friend. He's very good friends with Stephen A. He's even better friends with Michael Wilbon. They're very close. So I think he'll continue to come on all the shows, and I hope that the other guys will as well, and I hope that they will like it. I think it's I get it. ESPN, it's a daunting, like the letters are daunting, but I've been there, almost 29 years. I can tell you it is in most every way a fabulous place to work and a fabulous place to be. And I think that as those guys get accustomed to it, I think that they will like it.
Yeah, and he even talks about watching ESPN's morning shows regularly. So like he does a ton of, like you mentioned, non-ESPN. He's on radio shows across the country every week. Like it's not like he does Inside the NBA and then he's this recluse the rest of the week. So I predict that
I think he wants to do what he wants to do.
Right.
I think he wants to do the interviews he wants to do, and I think he doesn't want to be told he has to do more than that. Yeah. And look, I can't speak for the people I work for, but I don't have any reason to think that anyone's going to tell him he needs to do anything he doesn't want to do.
Yeah. Is having a role with NFL coverage special? Like you gave up NBA Countdown soon after you joined NFL Countdown. Stephen A. Smith has even said that he'd like to be involved with the NFL with Monday Night Football. Does being part of the NFL on ESPN feel big?
Oh, God, yes. I mean, being part of the coverage of the National Football League is, I think, most people's dream who do what I do. Like, like I'm a kid who grew up with season tickets to the Jets at Shea Stadium. And then when I got old enough, I lived in New York. I think we were among the very first people who had cable when cable first became a thing. I started watching ESPN in 1979. I started watching Chris Berman hosting that show, which was then called Game Day, Sunday Game Day, before it became Sunday Countdown. In whatever year they started, 81, 82, whatever year it was they started. To be sitting in that chair is ridiculous. To be helping get people ready for this bordering on religious experience that is, the watching of football on Sundays in America, is an honor. It's a privilege. It took me 28 years at ESPN to get the to be asked to do it, and it is one of the great thrills of my career. So I love it. I love doing the draft too. I started doing the draft 5 years ago. Yes, I mean, I love covering all the sports. I loved doing the NBA. Being part of the NBA playoffs, being part of the NBA finals was a ridiculous thrill. And I one of the only regrets I have in my whole life is that I so wish my dad had lived to see that. Like my dad died in January of 2016. And like my father loved basketball. That was his favorite sport by far. And, for him to have seen me say, "Good evening and welcome to ABC's coverage of Game 1 of the NBA Finals," I really regret that. That was a thrill beyond thrills. And the NFL is equally that. I read what you're talking about, that Steve wants to be a part of the football, and as well he should be. It is a wonderful privilege to be a part of it. So does it feel big? Yes, it feels ridiculously big.
How is preparing for the NFL draft? What goes into that?
I love it. I love it. I start in January. So I start doing players. Here's how I view my role in that. I'm not an analyst. I'm not an evaluator of players. Yeah. I can't pretend I am. I wouldn't pretend I am. No one wants to hear my evaluation of any of these players. I try and aggregate all of the information that is possible about all of the players that are going to be drafted in the first 3 rounds, which are the 2 nights that I do, so that I can synthesize it in as digestible a fashion as possible for the audience that is watching, and put Mel and Lewis and Booger and Shefty and everyone else in the best positions to do the show the best they can do it. That people are not tuning in to hear what I have to say. They're tuning in to hear what they have to say. So I start in January, right after the last game, right after the championship game, and I start doing players. And I try and have just some working knowledge of every player who's going to be drafted. First and foremost, how to pronounce their name. That to me would be the biggest shame, would be that this kid works his whole life to get drafted into the NFL, and some dopey host on ESPN said his name wrong. So that's my first concern. And then I try and have, for the guys who are likely to be drafted on the first night, I'll try and have a paragraph. For the guys who are going to be drafted in the second and into the third round, I'll try and have like a good fact or 2 about them that I think are interesting. And like, for example, one of the players, God, it all happened so fast that I've forgotten who it was, but my favorite note that I had this year was one of the players was born on February 29th. So he has actually only celebrated 5 birthdays. I loved that note. God, it's killing me that I can't remember which player it was now, but I love that. And so I'll try and do that, because by the third round, you don't want to hear from me. You don't need me to tell you what this 40 time was and all that kind of stuff. In this day and age, like, most of them have transferred at least once. So I'll tell you, well, he started at this college, then he went to this college. He finished with 19 sacks. He was a first-team All-American. And one other thing, Mel, and I'm trying to get it to Mel within 10 seconds of Roger saying his name. So that's how I view my role. And if people walk away from the telecast saying, I feel like that was well organized. Like, I got it. I didn't have any trouble following what was going on, and everyone was really good. Wow, Mel was really good. Wow, Lewis was really good. Wow, Booger was really good. Then I feel like I did my job. And so I start on players in mid-January, and I do 2 or 3 a day, just about every day up until the draft. So I usually, like this year, I think I did 136 players. With the compensatories, I think we had 101 picks. And I always joke that if when the name is announced, all you hear me say is Mel, that's a person I didn't do. And this year, I think there were 2 of them. There was one year that there were like 6 of them, and I was really pissed at myself.
Did you think there may have been too much Shedeur Sanders talk during the draft, or can you not have too much Shedeur Sanders talk right now?
So I didn't feel that way. I was there Thursday and Friday night.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel that way. I thought we made a real so Thursday night. So look, we knew going into it that this was a possibility. I'll tell you what the plan was. So we knew that he was either going to get drafted 3 by the Giants or he wasn't, and that the likelihood was that he was not. At that point, there were a few possibilities, but we had heard basically, from our inside, from Shefty, basically, the Jets aren't going to take him. The Raiders aren't going to take him. The Saints at 9 were the next logical spot. So our game plan was, we'll talk about it until 9. If he doesn't go at 9, there's pretty much a vacuum until 21 when the Steelers pick. And I think if you go back and look at it, I don't believe we said his name from the time the 9th pick was made to the time the 21st pick was made. That's whatever that is. That's a third of the night. His name was not spoken. Then when we got to the Steelers, it felt like you would not be doing your job if you didn't say, okay, is this the spot that they're going to take Shedeur Sanders? They don't. And then I think we sort of touched on it a few times as the night went on, like, could we see a trade up here? But we really didn't talk about it that much. The second night, when it started really snowballing, it became, I think it would have been journalistically irresponsible, if that doesn't sound ridiculous in this context, not to talk about it at least a little. I mean, It was the most astonishing thing that has happened in the draft, forgetting my 5 years, that I can ever remember. This is a player that at one point in the process, people thought was going to go in the top 5, and he wound up going in the 5th round. There was obviously a lot more going on than just his ability, because there was not one evaluation. I read every mock draft. I read every word that every evaluator wrote or spoke in the 4 months leading up to the draft. There's not one person who didn't think at worst that he was a second-round talent. So for a second-round talent at that position to go in the 5th round is a monumental story. So I think to cover it thoroughly and fully and enthusiastically, if that's the right word, was 100% the right thing to do. Too much, I suppose, is in the eye of the beholder. But, I think we had to cover it, and I remain completely astonished by it. And I think the pendulum completely swung on him from people viewing him as sort of like a cocky young person that they were rooting against to now, like, everyone is rooting for him because of what happened. And I think he's at worst a second-round pick masquerading as a 5th-round pick. I think he will be the starting quarterback in Cleveland this year, and I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he doesn't have like a huge high ceiling, from what all of the evaluators say, but I think his floor is very high.
Yeah.
All the stuff that good quarterbacks do, everyone tells me he's great at. So I think he's going to be a good player.
Last week with Around the Horn coming to an end, I was like, yes, ESPN technically canceled the show, but after a 23-year run, you hope Tony Reali and everybody involved is able to feel nothing but a sense of pride about how successful that show was. I am curious, when Mike and Mike came to an end, did you get to step back during that and kind of celebrate what that show was when it was ending?
Absolutely. I mean, in my particular case, we ended the show in mid-November, and we were supposed to launch. Mike started up with Trey, I want to say it was like 2 weeks later. We were originally supposed to launch Get Up on January 1st. That was the original plan. It got pushed back to April. So I essentially didn't work for like 5 months. They assigned me to a few things. I did some Sports Center stuff at the Super Bowl and whatnot, but for the most part, I did nothing but reflect. And I did think about that a little bit when I watched all of the reaction to Around the Horn on Friday. I did remember that. I think what happens is if you stick around long enough, Mike and I were together 18 years. And Around the Horn was it 22 years on the air? I mean, 20.
Almost 23.
It's
like
ridiculous.
22 and a half.
There's an expression called in our business called letting it bake. Like when you let something bake, there is a value in that because you become a part of people's routine. They count on you, that you are with them through monumental things in their lives, and there's real value in that. And the fact that show was as important, I know this. I don't have to hope this. I know Tony knows that. And I know that all of them who were regulars on that show, who were there all the time, know that because they hear, you can feel it. You can feel it in the interaction that you have. Not even direct, but indirect. You could just sort of feel it in the air. And certainly Mike and I could feel that when we were ending the show and even before that. So yes, absolutely. I had the opportunity to do that and it felt great. I mean, we created something that mattered to people in a medium that's not easy to do. I mean, think about how many shows exist, right? How many shows over the 23 years that Around the Horn has been on the air, how many different shows started and stopped during that period of time? Yeah. They were a constant. So that's an enormous success. And I'm sure that I have no doubt that Tony feels that and that he feels great about it because he absolutely should.
What was your relationship like with Mike during the show, and what is your relationship with him now?
Our relationship for the overwhelming majority of the years we were together was extraordinary, and things didn't end the way either of us would have liked, and that's old news now. But these days we don't really talk to each other much. Every once in a long while, but I will forever wish him well, and I will forever be grateful for the opportunity and the experience that show was, because it changed my life in exclusively good ways. If I think back to where I was when it started, it's one of the great things that has ever happened to me, and I will never stop feeling that way.
It's been 7 years or so since that show ended. If you were to have to, forced to be co-host a radio show with him tomorrow morning, would that chemistry be instant? What would it sound like?
I don't know. It probably would.
Yeah.
Chemistry is I'll tell you what my definition of chemistry is. And I think this is true of broadcasting and probably true in almost anything, in any relationship. So if you and I, let's say Greeny and Brandon are going to do a show together, or going to be partners in any endeavor together. If we have no chemistry, then what we are going to produce is going to equal Brandon plus Greeny. It's going to be what you do plus what I do. If we have chemistry, then what we're going to wind up with is Brandon times Greeny. I'm going to make you better than you are without me, and you're going to make me better than I am without you. And that's what chemistry is. And it's very unpredictable. I don't know that most of the time when, let's just use broadcasting, when executives put people together and say, here, go do a show, that they know for sure. You can hope that you have chemistry. You can try to develop chemistry. But my experience has been chemistry is something that generally you either have or you don't. And it isn't obvious because two people can be polar opposites in most every way and still have it. And we obviously did. So would we still? I have no idea. I mean, there's been a lot of life has gone on for both of us since then. But we certainly had it then. That's for damn sure.
Yeah. I think you would still have it. I think it would come back pretty quickly. Did you feel that you had chemistry developing with Michelle Beadle and Jalen Rose when the first installment of Get Up started?
Yes, I did. I mean, when we first launched Get Up, So I've launched 2 shows in my career. One of them was Mike and Mike, and we did that with absolutely no one paying any attention. And then we launched Get Up, and as you know, that was with like under a microscope where everyone in the world was paying attention. But that doesn't change the fundamentals of what you're doing. What you're doing is you're beginning with a series of educated guesses. You are guessing that this is what the audience is going to like. This is what the audience is going to want. And then you launch, and then you immediately start evolving. You immediately say, okay, this is working, this is working, this is working. This isn't, and this isn't. And you start developing. And then you, by working, I mean exclusively, the audience likes this, the audience doesn't like that. That's who you work for. I always say ESPN pays me, but I work for the audience. They're the ones who decide if I have a job or not. So when we launched with the idea that what people wanted was a show in the morning that was going to be sports and a lot of other stuff. We were going to do fun videos, viral videos, whatever else it was we were going to do. And the feedback that we got almost immediately was that that's not what people wanted from ESPN in the morning. People wanted the sports. And so we started evolving almost immediately. And I think we got it right pretty quickly. And I mean, I love Jalen, and I always will. And I think Beetle and I got along great. I still like her. I mean, we exchange notes every now and again. I don't see her much. I mean, I haven't seen her in a while, but we'll exchange texts or what have you. And she's an incredibly smart, incredibly talented person. And the circumstances at that year and everything else that we started, they lined up in a million different ways that I think some of them were just completely beyond our control. But I think if just using Beetle, for example, if she and I had just sort of stayed together and worked for a really long time, do I think we would have figured it out? Absolutely. I absolutely do.
How much say did you have in the with the first installment? Like, were you pitched on doing a show with Beetle and Jalen, or did you pitch Jalen and Michelle on doing a show with you?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of both. It was a really unusual time in the company's history for a million different reasons. The primary one being that at one point the leader of the company was John Skipper, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. And then it all happened during what was a strange time of transition. But I mean, the answer to that question is a little bit of both. Certainly, Jalen and I had been working together forever, and I was very interested in doing a show with him. And I had been an enormous admirer of Beetle going back to her days on Sports Nation with Colin. And so one of the first conversations we ever had was, I don't remember if I was the first one who said it or someone else said, how about Michelle Beetle? But it sounded like a great idea to me immediately.
7 years later, how do you feel about the way Get Up has progressed and developed into what it is now?
I'm delighted. I mean, I think look, the world changes so much, so fast all the time, right? Like I sort of jokingly say, in our industry, we've gone through the Industrial Revolution every year for like the last 10 years. Everything is constantly changing so fast. And what that means is that the expectations of your audience is changing that fast. And so the real challenge is keeping up with what they want. Just to go back to the point that we were making a minute ago, what the audience did not want in 2018 was on ESPN in the morning for us to have a bunch of fun videos and all that kind of stuff. They wanted sports. We started doing much more sports, and then we just sort of kept evolving it as we went. I would say we have continued to evolve the show constantly based upon what we perceive to be the desire of our audience. And that is forever, changing. So I think the show is vastly different now from what it was a year ago. And I would guess that a year from now, it's going to be vastly different than it is now. Certainly, if we're doing our jobs, it will be. And I think I'm better in it than I was a year ago, just based on the reps. You do something every single day. You just keep getting better at it. You keep figuring out new ways to do stuff. And I'd like to think a year from now, I'll be that much better then. So I think we have become what people now want on ESPN in the morning. I think people want to put on ESPN in the morning, and they want what we deliver them every single day. And if, as their desires change, we'll hopefully evolve with that. But I feel great about where we are, and even better about where we're going.
Yeah, it was really, the show was getting started in an era in sports media where there was so much hot takes and debate, especially as First Takes lead in. Did you ever feel pressure to have or give more hot takes yourself, or be more of a needle mover the way Stephen A. Smith and say Skip Bayless are and have been throughout their careers? Or were you always comfortable being the host and the point guard and confident that the show could work that way?
So here's what I would say. You cannot fake it and do a job like mine. You could probably fake it for like a half hour a week. Like if you had a half hour weekly show, you could probably put on a persona and you could achieve something. If you're going to do a daily show, like my radio show was 4 hours, this show is 2 hours live every single day, you can't fake that. You just got to be who you are, and you've got to hope that it's good enough. You've got to hope that what it is what the audience wants. I also think that a really smart person understands their strengths and their weaknesses. If I tried to be Stephen A., if I tried to be Pat McAfee, if I tried to be, Charles Barkley, Michael Wilbon, Tony Kornheiser, I would fail because I'm not them. I don't do what they do. I wouldn't be good at that. I do think, to quote the great Liam Neeson, I have a particular set of skills, and I have found a way in the right environment to utilize them in a way that I think works and is effective. And I think one of the nice things about our daily lineup on ESPN now is that we really do have variety. I think, when we go on the air live at 7:00, you've got SportsCenter. So you get all your news, all your information, all your highlights. Then you come to us. And I describe us as all things to all sports fans on any given day. Whatever feels like is we need to be, we can be. We can be highlight driven. We can be opinion driven. We can be humor driven. It sort of depends on what the sports news of the day is. But generally, it's more of an ensemble, fun conversation show. And then you lead into the takes that are on Stephen A. And then you lead into the abject madness that is Pat McAfee and his crew. And so I think there's something for everyone. And I think that's a really good, personally, I think that's a really good thing. I think if it was all just a sort of a never ending array of variations on the same theme, I don't think that would appeal to as many people.
You mentioned Pat McAfee. I'll ask, how did you feel about Aaron Rodgers' appearances on Pat McAfee as a Jets fan? And how did you feel about it as an ESPN employee? I
loved him both ways. I mean, there is no one in our industry that would be offered the opportunity to talk to Aaron Rodgers every week and say no. It's just not on the list of options. He was and remains fascinating. There were times when it perhaps got into areas that you wouldn't want it to on ESPN. That might not have been ideal, but generally speaking, to have a superstar quarterback who is extremely open about his opinions and stuff on your show every single day is a great thing. I didn't have an opinion on it as a Jet fan one way or the other, but just as an observer of the passing scene, I thought it was great. And if he does come back and play for the Steelers or whoever this year, then I hope that he will be on with McAfee again. I'd like to hear what he has to say. And the beauty of it is anyone who doesn't want to hear it doesn't have to listen to it, but no one's being forced to listen to it. But I think there are enough people out there interested in what he has to say that there will be plenty of people listening.
What has Pat been for ESPN?
I think he's great. Look, I love him. I like to say I take a little bit of the credit for him. With us, I brought him to Get Up. I was the first person to put him on ESPN regularly. And it started because I saw him at the draft in Nashville, and there was just an obvious spark. Like I watched his performance there, and I thought, man, this guy's got something going on. And so I reached out to him on social, and I said, hey, it's Greeny, and I'd love to talk to you. And, we started up a conversation, and that led to him coming and doing Get Up once a week, every week for 2 seasons. And he was great. I mean, we had him in there, him and Rex Ryan and Orlovsky. That was a great combination, and he was terrific. Pat is a really smart, really talented guy, and so I think he's been terrific. And look, he is an acquired taste, so he's not for everyone. I get that, and as I said before, some people will like one flavor. They like what I do. Others will like another flavor. They like what Steve does. Others will like another flavor. They like what McAfee does. At ESPN, we can offer all of those. And I think that's a great thing.
I know it's only been a few months since you stopped hosting Greeny, but do you miss radio yet?
To say I miss it wouldn't be the way I'd put it, but I do feel sad.
Yeah.
I did feel sad stopping that. It was a show I really enjoyed. I love the medium. It's where I started. I started in radio. I really like it as a medium. I still believe in it as a medium. It is much maligned, but I still think it is irreplaceable, some of the things that it brings. And I really liked the people I was working with. I loved this little community that we had put together. I don't know if you ever heard the show, but I worked with Hembo and 2 other guys, Bubba and Cam, and we really had like a nice little ensemble going. And so I was sad to give that up. And the feedback that we got from the audience was really good. I think people really enjoyed what we were doing. And at the end, when they wanted me to do the football, just something had to give. And so unfortunately it was that. So I was sad to give it up. And I don't think that'll be the last time I'm on the radio. I don't know when, but I would expect that someday I will go back. I really like it, and I don't see any reason. I like it, and I feel like I still do it well. So I someday, somewhere down the road, I think I'll go back.
Did you fill in, or I think it was after Regis retired and before Strahan?
Yes.
You had
3 days with Kelly Ripa. Yes.
How was that? Was
tremendous?
And was that something that did you think that there was a chance that you could potentially be the permanent co-host? Like, did that job interest you, or
that seemed extremely unlikely?
Yeah.
With the people that were interested in it, I loved it. She could not have been nicer. I had such a good time with her. They had me in to do it once, and it went really well. So they had me come back 2 more times. I was thrilled.
Yeah.
I was doing Mike and Mike then, and I think you have to know where your bread is buttered. Sports is what I do, and I think to venture out of that completely would have been a mistake. But I loved it. It was great fun, and if they needed to fill in for a day, I would gladly do it again. I can't begin to tell you how nice she was. I mean, she's someone that I had never met, and she was super accommodating and friendly and nice. And I actually ran into her years later in an entirely different context, and she could not have been more friendly and remembered me and was with her family, and I was with mine, and everyone was chatting. And so I really liked her. And so I did not expect that was going to become my full-time job. No, but I did really like it. It's a very fun, loose, laid back milieu, very, very different from what I'm accustomed to.
And then I remember the Just for Men, the All I Do is Shampoo commercials. Is that still the case?
I shampoo. What was the All I Do is Shampoo? I'm trying to remember the tagline.
Yeah, I think it was basically saying like you don't need hair dye or anything, and it's
I do not dye my hair. Okay, so this has been something that back on Mike and Mike, I was constantly being accused. I don't know how else to tell you this. This is, I swear on my life, this is my natural hair color.
No, well, congratulations.
7 years old, and this is the color of my hair. I have a tiny little bit of gray here and a tiny little bit of gray there, and that's it. And I wouldn't mind getting a little salt and pepper. Like, I think it's a great look and all of that. But I do not do it, and no one believes me, and I don't know what else to say. Yeah. It is what it is.
I think we should all be so lucky. Mike, you were great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That is Mike Greenberg. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.